Welcome to the Petchem Development Conference. We here at Shale Crescent USA appreciate this opportunity to present today. My name is Jerry James, and I'm president of Artex Oil Company. And with me today is Joe Eddy.
I'm Joe Eddy, and I'm the retired president and CEO of Eagle Manufacturing Company. We welcome you here with us today. Thank you, Jerry.
Joe and I represent over 80 years of experience ranging all the way from energy production to manufacturing. And what we're going to talk to you today is back to the basics. And that is, how do you rebuild the economy with energy, petrochemicals, and manufacturing? And it's really, when you look at it, it's something we're going to have to do because the economy is probably the most stressed, as we're going to show you today, it has been since the Great Depression. If you want to get back to the basics, there's no better story than talking about Vince Lombardi, the great football coach of the Green Bay Packers. Vince Lombardi suffered a devastating loss in 1960 in the championship game. He started the next season with his 40-team professionals by holding up the football and say, "Gentlemen, this is a football." Why did he go back to the basics? Because he wanted to build a foundation for success that would carry them through their careers. How well did they do? They won over 5 championships in the next 7 years. Never again did they lose a playoff game. And he became one of the winningest coaches in history. And that's really what our basics is. What's our basics? That is, manufacturing creates jobs and builds wealth for America. Let me say that again, because everybody listening to this needs to be able to articulate the message. Manufacturing creates jobs and builds wealth for America. And before we get started talking about that today, I want to just take a minute and explain who Shale Crescent USA is. Shale Crescent USA is a group of volunteers. We are a nonprofit organization. Some people like myself are from the upstream side of the oil and gas industry. Joe, who I'm presenting with today, is in manufacturing. We have people in the petrochemical business, into marketing, into sales, into banking. It's a group of volunteers from Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania that realized that we're a unique place in history right now. Shale development of the Marcellus and Utica created a significant opportunity to bring manufacturing jobs to our region. And how do we do this? We do the basic research for a petrochemical or manufacturing company on the benefits of locating in this region, and then we give that research away because what we want at the end is the manufacturing jobs. Today, our speech is basically in 3 parts. Part 1, we're going to talk about what's happened in the economy, and particularly in the job market. Part 2, we're going to talk about solutions. And we're going to hopefully draw some connections that you may have never drawn before and how closely manufacturing jobs are connected to energy production. And then finally, we're going to talk about the benefits of the entire United States, but specifically right here in the Shale Crescent region of Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. So we're starting out with the problem right here. When you look at the unemployment rate, thank God it's gone down in June, but you can see that it peaked at nearly 15%, and we still have nearly 18 million people unemployed. This chart goes back to 1950, and what you see here is we're at a historic high post-World War II unemployment rate. When you've got these problems, you really have to be very thoughtful about what the solutions are, and those are the solutions we're going to talk about today. When you look at the unemployment, you have to kind of look at it on a historic basis. We truly don't know what the real unemployment rate is because a lot of small businesses have received funds through the Payroll Protection Act and have kept their employees on the payroll who may have hit the unemployment line, and thank God for that. But we think we could be close to the Great Depression numbers. And you really have to be thoughtful about how you're going to get out of this type problem. A lot of the research after the Great Depression indicated some of the programs that they had were not effective, and some of them were even counterproductive. And we're worried we're going to see the same thing in today's world. And that is, I hear some of the proposals to help us get people employed, and I think some of them will not be helpful, and some of them will be counterproductive. What we're suggesting, back to the basics, is that manufacturing creates jobs and it creates wealth for America. And that's really how you solve your unemployment problem. We're not the only ones that say this. I'm going to show you a little short 2.5-minute video that a lot of people are talking about the need to bring manufacturing back to the USA?
Because the key here is having advanced manufacturing on U.S. soil that can leapfrog other countries so we don't have to worry about competing against cheap sweatshop labor, lax environmental regulations, different tax regimes, and the massive subsidies of foreign governments who are actually directly attacking our industrial base.
But also the supply chain issue. The idea that much of what we need to protect the health of the American people is in the control of foreign governments who can interdict it and say we're not shipping stuff to the United States when everyone else in the world wants it during a pandemic was a crazy situation to get into. Happened before this administration, and the president's trying to deal with it.
What is our relationship with China going to look like?
Boy, that's the real question mark. I think when this is over, and it will be over, we need to reassess our relationship with China, and particularly our dependency. You know, think about the United States' advantages in the geopolitical sense. We can feed ourselves. Very few countries in the world can say that. We have an economy where we buy things, we make things, we buy things. We can really have an independent economy to a certain extent. And then finally, we've always, in the military national security field, we've always said, we need to make sure our supply chains for military equipment and technology are secure. We now have to add to that pharmaceuticals. We realized for the last 10 or so, 15, 20 years that we were dependent on Middle East oil. We're now energy independent, whatever happens with the price war. But at the final thing, so we can feed ourselves, we have our own energy, we have our own military supplies. The missing link is that we don't have our own pharmaceutical supplies.
What can we do to dramatically reduce, if not eliminate, our dependence on China? Would something like a Marshall Plan, in concert with our close allies, help us achieve such a goal?
Larry?
Well, okay. I don't want to pick on China right now. It's not high on my list. We are aware. The United States is aware of certain issues with China. We have engaged with them. We have a good trade deal the president negotiated with them, but there are issues. We'd like more American companies to come back home. We'll deal with that over a period of time, but we are engaged with China, and the president continues to enjoy a very good relationship with President Xi. As far as policies to get the companies home, there are a lot of things we can do. One of them, by the way, we don't have time to pursue it, Charles, maybe the next time. I would say 100% immediate expensing across the board. Plant, equipment, intellectual property, structures, renovations. In other words, if we had 100% immediate expensing, we would literally pay the moving costs of American companies from China back to the U.S. We would basically provide them with moving cost payments. That's one way. That's not the only item on the list, but I think 100% expensing would be a very good thing. And by the way, it would be a very good thing for American companies here at home. So that's just one pro-growth policy point.
A lot of discussion right there about what we can do to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. And remember, our talk was back to the basics. How do we get manufacturing back to this country, reach jobs and wealth for America? This is a chart that we've created at Shale Crescent USA, and very few people have really looked at this correlation, but it makes sense when you see it. And that is, in order to run a manufacturing plant, you need energy to run the plant, and you need molecules to come in the front door to make goods. There are over 5,000 products made from oil and gas. So you can see that having oil and natural gas is critical to manufacturing. What you see here is a chart from World War II going all the way to the present. The light gray bars that you see in the background are manufacturing jobs. The red line you see in the foreground is oil and gas production in the United States during that same time period. What you see, and this is the thing that very few people understand and where I think people like us can add to the conversation, when you look at the post-World War II period, when we had that increase in manufacturing jobs all the way up until the late 1970s, we had an increase in oil and natural gas production. Not surprising, because they supplied the fuel and the molecules. What you see is when oil and gas peak and start to decline, you see the peak and the decline of manufacturing jobs. Now what you see is there was an abrupt drop in around 2000, 1999, 2000, when China was admitted to the World Trade Organization. That's what you heard on some of the people in the video discuss. But here's what's surprising, and very few people realize. When we had an inflection point on oil and gas about 10 years ago, we had an inflection point on manufacturing jobs. And we are now adding manufacturing jobs to this country. This is significant, and it points to opportunities that we can do even more with the right trade policies and the right industrial policies. Been a lot of discussions about China, and we're not here to pick on the Chinese people or anything like that, but China has become one of the largest exporters in the world, and we're going to see that they export a tremendous amount to the United States. And just to kind of take that point on a personal level, as a proud grandfather, here's my two favorite people of Chinese descent. Those are two of my granddaughters right there, and their smiling faces just light my day up every day that I see them. I'm going to turn the talk over now to talk about manufacturing. I'll turn it over to Joe Eddy.
Thank you, Jerry. That's a good setup for our next part of the presentation. And I always like to say, in my 40 years of that 80 years of experience that Jerry talked about, I've often found that actually the biggest challenges often present the best opportunities for growth. And I look at that effectively turning negative situations into positive. And I think we're at a period of time in our country and in the world where we really have major challenges. We all are aware of those, but we really have great opportunities that could come out the backside of that. You know, Jerry set up the issue with the loss of manufacturing jobs. I think it's been a proven fact that the loss of 8.5 million manufacturing jobs in a very short period of time in the United States has really created an issue that most people didn't realize. When you're trying to recover from the Great Recession that we had that started in 2008, you know, that was one of the longest recovery periods that we've ever had in a depression or a recessionary period. It's because we didn't have the manufacturing jobs. And we'll allude to some of that. And as Jerry said, we're not picking on China, but one of our biggest challenges right now is China. And if you look at this slide, it gives an indication over the last 35 years, we've had $7 trillion of imports from China to the U.S. over a 35-year period of time. You know, that's over $200 billion per year on average. But if you look, as we move forward with that, you look at the time period, most of that buildup has been in the last 20 years. And if you look at that, the last couple of years, you know, we've averaged over $1.2 billion, over $1.2 billion per day of imports from China. It's an amazing amount of imports, and what that does is it represents jobs that have left the U.S. So as we move forward, and again, Jerry pointed out, in 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, and we really started seeing the major imports and the reduction in manufacturing jobs in this country. You look at this slide, decreasing U.S. manufacturing jobs, they all go hand in hand. You can see a loss again of 7.9 million U.S. manufacturing jobs. It fell right in hand with the imports from China. Now we have imports from other countries. We have good trading relationships with Mexico and Canada. We have at times had good relationships with China. But you can see what it has led to. It's time to take a good hard look at this and time to look at the differences in what our opportunities and advantages might be to be more competitive as we move more of those manufacturing jobs back to the United States. What is the value of manufacturing? It's not just those manufacturing jobs or the loss of the 8 million jobs or the benefit of the gain of the 1.2 to 1.4 million new manufacturing jobs in the last 5 or 10 years. The additional benefit of that is the fact that there's an additive value to one manufacturing job throws off an additional 3.4 to 4 additional service and support jobs that are really required to support that one manufacturing job. And in the petrochemical industry, it's closer to 4.5 to 5 jobs for each support job. So that, again, is another very important part of why the manufacturing jobs add so much to the economy. And a lot of times, people can't even understand that additional build is the greatest part of that. So we talked about the problem, where the problem comes from, what we're kind of focusing on right now. What we want to talk about mostly is the backside of that, creating opportunities for growth. And that growth would be in bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States. So how can we bring those jobs back? What would that do? Creates additional manufacturing jobs and the support jobs that I talked about. And this next one increases government revenues. That's a very, very important part of bringing those jobs back. We need tax revenue. We need tax growth to continue to grow our infrastructure. It also, we found here in the last 6 months, one of the major important things is it improves our supply chain security and the certainty that we have the things that are really important for us to operate as a country independently. This is, next slide, the manufacturing cost index is one that's very near and dear to my heart, because as a manufacturing manager and leader over the last 25 years, I followed this very closely, both on a competitive basis, competing with other manufacturers from China, as well as watched with the opportunities. My company's products were 100% made in the U.S., made here in Shale Crescent USA, actually, in West Virginia. Over 90% of them were made here in West Virginia and Ohio. So when I look at this, I've been tracking this for about 25 years, and 25 years ago, we had a 30% differential between our costs in the U.S. and China's costs being about 30% lower. But what's happened over the last 20, 25 years is we've seen the middle class in China wanting more things, wanting to improve their lives and wanting higher wages, and transportation rates for containers between China and the United States have increased. One of the major things, and I think Jerry will talk a little bit more about that in a minute, is the fact that we have right now, as Jerry noted, an energy advantage. We have a significant energy, not only the amount of resource that we have, but the cost of that resource, especially here in the Shale Crescent region. So on a comparative basis, China's had an increase in labor rates, electricity costs, their natural gas and other energy costs have gone up, and we've seen the benefit here of our increase in natural gas and energy resources over the last 10 years that have put us back into a 3 to 5% differential, not the 30% that we were seeing 20 to 25 years ago. So that's a very important part of adding to the opportunity. We really are on more of a level playing field now than we've been on for 25 to 30 years. Along with that, not only my experience, but that's supported by the Boston Consulting Group in effectively saying what that last slide says. They once had an enormous cost advantage. Today, that cost advantage has eroded, again, to the point of 3 to 5%. That cannot be offset if you have a client base and a distribution base that wants products tomorrow and they want quality products. You can't be in a position of waiting on safety and security products to be shipped overseas if there's any problems with shipping, if there's a problem with quality. So if it's made here, that's what we found and why we decided to stay completely 100% in the United States. We always had the benefit of being able to make it and ship it and make sure that the quality was controlled here locally. So again, support from the Boston Consulting Group. The key part being they have relatively high energy costs, and we, of course, have very competitive low energy costs now in this country. Jerry, I'll hand this back to you.
Thank you, Joe, and I'll cover some of the energy points Joe made. You notice the Boston Consulting Group hit right on that advantage. It was the energy cost. If you look at the energy production, again, as we kind of viewed earlier, from 1950 to the end of 2019, what you see is we have hit an all-time high in energy production in this country. Our energy production is almost up 50% from our previous peak set in the early 1970s. That's why we're very confident we now can compete on a world stage. And we're going to drill down and have a little more information on this as we go through. If you look at the Shale Crescent region, we mentioned earlier that we would talk about specific advantages located in Shale Crescent. Again, that's Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. We not only have the energy advantage, we have the demand advantage that Joe will talk about a little later, very close to this market. We also have water and labor. When you look at the natural gas portion of the energy, it's just fascinating as it applies to the Shale Crescent region. If you look at natural gas production, it's peaked at an all-time high in the last 10 years since we developed horizontal drilling. What very few people understand is that 85% of that growth in natural gas production has occurred in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. That's why we formed the Shale Crescent. We are so excited about the opportunity to bring manufacturers here to use that energy advantage. Well, how big is it? It's hard to believe, even though Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, the Shale Crescent, are half the land mass of Texas. We produce more natural gas now than the #1 producing state in the Union, Texas. We produce about a third more than they do. How do we compete on a world scale? If Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania were a country, we alone, without the rest of the United States, would be the third largest producer in the world. That chart right there represents almost 70% of all the natural gas produced in the world comes from just 10 countries. And when you look at that chart, you can see this region competes very well with that area. If you look at us compared to China in the United States, we produce 5 times more natural gas than China. That's what gives us the competitive advantage that the Boston Consulting Group was talking about earlier. Joe will talk a little bit what the demand advantage is.
Thank you. Yes, as we move from the upstream to the midstream and downstream, the demand side is even more favorable, I think, on a cost competitive, but is also for proximity. If you look at the proximity or the location of the Shale Crescent, we're right in the center of 70% of the polyethylene demand in the United States, or within 700 miles, or what we like to consider a one-day's drive. That's the significant part and benefit of having the ethane, the raw materials located here from the natural gas derivatives, as well as now being able to crack them in the Monaca plant at Shell, and hopefully the benefit of other cracking plants and processing plants as we move forward. Again, because 70% of the North American demand is located right here. Even more so on the polypropylene side, we have 77% of the polypropylene demand in North America here in the Shale Crescent region within again, a day's drive. So again, the demand proximity is located right here on top of the resource. Another major natural resource that we have, and again, this is something that's often overlooked, but is as majorly important as being right in the middle of your raw materials. We look at water as one of our major raw materials. We have navigable waterways. We can reach the world from this region. We also have lots of water with the Ohio River, Muskingum, Kanawha, all the lakes, access to processing water. That again is a major requirement for manufacturing, and we have an abundant supply for any of those needs. The other thing that we have here, and something we can be really proud of, because we really started the manufacturing base, not only base manufacturing, but also petrochemical manufacturing, over 100 years ago. Again, it grew with the evolution of the oil and gas industry and the opportunities that created. So we still have a very trained, very high work ethic workforce here. And a lot of people say we don't have the numbers. Well, we do. We have a great, the value of, the manufacturing experience historically, the coal experience, the steel experience. And we have that history where we have people that know how to do things and like to get things done. So a skilled and trained regional workforce is something that we have as another natural resource. You want to?
Well, we can both handle this. One of the things we found out when we did a tremendous amount of research around the Shale Crescent, and we've done just $1 million worth of research, and it's very detailed. And like I said earlier, it's available if you're a petrochemical manufacturing. We'd be happy to share that with you free of charge. What we found out, though, was this, is the cost advantage is all based actually on transportation. So if you build on top of your resource, build on top of your natural gas liquid supply, and build in the center of your customers like Joe's discussed, you can save a tremendous amount. That's why it's more economic to build, like say, a polyethylene plant here than it says on the Texas Gulf Coast, which is one of the best places in the world. But that also applies to China. China is resource short. We've shown that we produce 5 times more natural gas than China in the United States. They have to import molecules from here and other places in the world, make a product, and ship it back. So that gives us a fundamental advantage over China, not only on cost, but Joe mentioned, you can get your product quicker. If you have a quality issue, it can be resolved very quickly. You don't have months of material in the supply chain. So we think it really just takes a whole new opportunity for manufacturers to look at that.
Okay, so we've talked about workforce, and I've talked about proximity. The key thing about proximity that we found from all of our research at Shale Crescent is the fact that when you build a petrochemical facility or a manufacturing facility on top of your raw materials and in an energy advantaged area like the Shale Crescent, but you're also right in the middle of the largest demand and right in the middle of your markets for your materials that you produce, that's really where the cost and competitive advantage comes from for the Shale Crescent region. So that, again, is supported by all of our research documents and reports that we will offer to you. And again, we're back to the basics. What are those basic advantages that we've talked about today? Those basic advantages are that we have the most competitive energy region in the world. We're right on top of the demand for the major petrochemicals. We have water resources, and we have a great labor resource. So with that, those are the basics. Jerry, you want to?
Thank you again for your time. If you want any additional information, like Joe said, feel free to contact us. We'd be happy. If you're a petrochemical or you're a manufacturing company, we'd be happy to share our research. We've probably spent $1 million in conducting that research, but we'll give it to you free of charge, because at the end, all we want is the jobs for our region. Thank you.
Thank you very much.